Okay, welcome everybody to the Holding Hope facilitators meeting with Guy, and he is going to share his wealth of knowledge with us. And take it away, Guy.
Hey everybody, thanks for having me. I'm calling in on unceded traditional territories of the Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh nations, and I mean, we're all holding hope in this thing. Trying to day after day, month after month, year after year. It just seems like that's all we have is this form of hope and pushing forward and trying to figure out our grief, our loss, our anger, our frustration, and while at the same time trying to keep our own lives together. So I acknowledge every single one of you on the call. I know how extremely challenging that is. My background as a person is that I used drugs for a long time, and definitely was the believer that I was disposable and looked upon as garbage, and living in the downtown east side for decades, homeless, struggling. It wasn't, I often talk about the struggle is being more punishing than the drugs themselves. The drugs really weren't the problem. It was just the punishment that drug users often face. And so a lot of the times in my life, especially in the late 80s, early 90s, there was no support for substance users. You try to access a syringe service in the 80s or 90s. I actually know, myself included, was incarcerated for having drug paraphernalia. That's not even drugs. That's just the paraphernalia. And oftentimes where I've looked upon the services that are available back then were more trying to get people off drugs. They weren't trying to support people who were using drugs. And so when you have that, they collide. And so you don't seek help because you know what to expect from them. And so it was one of those things in my life where it was like, well, I don't want to do that, but I don't want to, get these life-threatening bone infections or endocarditis because you won't give me a syringe and I have to use the same one and sharpen it off a matchbook. And so, in seeing what I had seen, us as drug users were really the ones that took care of ourselves, because society sure didn't give a shit about us. And that's still very much evident today in our day and age in society. Sadly, it just seems to be that everybody is so focused on getting people to stop using drugs, and we often associate, the issues of harm reduction services as being something that enables people to continue using when it enables life. But oftentimes what happens with harm reduction is people mistake poverty as, if you look at the supervised consumption site, there's people that are out front, and people will say, well, they just stand out front. It's not bad. That's poverty. So, but oftentimes harm reduction takes the brunt force of what poverty is. It's not harm reduction. Poverty and harm reduction, these are all separate issues, but they've siloed it all into being harm reduction. And so that's where the blame comes and the anger comes from society. And so, until honestly the early 90s, which I met a human being by the name of Liz Evans, who was the first person that ever approached me and offered me a syringe and some water and an alcohol wipe. And literally my first response, because we actually had to pay for those syringes back then, money. And she said, no, I don't want you to pay for them. I want to give them to you. And I remember having that conversation with her. It just blew my mind. And she said, listen, it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter if you use drugs. You should be able to access clean supplies and safer supplies for your drug use. You're a human being. You don't have to not use drugs to deserve health care. And I'd never met a person say that to me in my life. I'd just always been, no, you're not getting anything. You know, I have to go to St. Paul's to break into their storeroom to actually steal the syringes. And when these services started to be implemented in the 90s, it really, really gave substance users a belief, especially it gave me a belief that there were some good people in our society that did actually care and it wasn't contingent on whether I was going to be off drugs. They just accepted me. That's the beauty of harm reduction. It meets people really where they're at, and it doesn't have an expectation to tell you how to live your life. It just supports you where you are. And as time went on, especially in the downtown east side, then we had DAS, and then obviously we have the amazing Ann Livingston on the call already. So you know, bumping into her at when they opened up the unsupervised or the supervised unsanctioned first injection site, which I remember it well, which is basically on, you know, Powell and Dunleavy. And here was the first time that somebody offered me a spot where I could go and use safely and be watched, and that I was a person. And that meant a lot. And obviously, wherever you are in whatever community you are in now, you face these challenges. And a lot of the times what happens is, I call it relationship equity. It's very, very powerful to have relationships. And you guys, as Mom Stop the Harm and your programs, you guys are very powerful in how you support community activism as well. It's kind of like, you know, something that you join forces with, you show up, you support, you know, in doing that, that's the stuff that gets noticed. I will say this, sadly, but I will say it, is that people probably, you know, drug users and drug user activists have been doing it a long time, but I think, you know, people would, with the moms there beside us is very, very powerful, in the sense that it actually, you know, people want to hear from the moms too, right? I just had a call this morning from a lady that started an outreach program in a small town in Alberta. And she called me today and she said, it's not like it would be in a big city. It's not like I can walk out on the street and meet people. You know, this is a rural community. It's happening inside. People are using drugs inside. And she said, I'm at a standstill because I don't have a nonprofit organization. I'm not a corporation. I'm just a human being trying to do something in my community to support people. And I said, yeah, sure, I'll do the best I can to help you. What is it you need help with? And she says, well, listen, like every person that I go into their house where they're using substances, they all are asking for fentanyl test strips. And in Alberta, you know, I have to go through an organization. It costs $1 a kit. And anyway, I'd contacted some friends here in BC, and anyway, we've gotten her 4 boxes of test strips to send her. And I mean, here's an individual that's just out by herself in a community and started that all her own and built that's the relationship equity. You build a relationship with people, you try to do your best to support them, but in a day and age where we're in this crisis and you have to still pay for fentanyl test strips, I mean, to me, that's just egregious. And so I want her to, she wants to continue keep doing it. And so I encouraged her to start a GoFundMe page, and I would help support it as well. And I'm sure a lot of other people will, just so that she can keep this up. But this is the stuff this is where a lot of people die, is in these communities. It's not like it is in the street or the downtown east side. So, you know, I look at how Vandu's grown from the 90s to what it is today. It's, you know, one of those things that it's built, that model has really built what's in the province today, in various communities, drug user activism groups, throughout our province, really kind of, you know, started to really move forward in the last couple of years, which is really powerful for me to see. I will say that from the 80s until now, yes, leaps and bounds as harm reduction services, depending on where you are, especially in the downtown east side, they're probably on every block, like multiple on each block. But I want you all to take that with a grain of salt, because in a lot of places that you guys are calling in from, that is just not the case. And it's extremely challenging for you and in your community. You're met by municipalities, bylaws, and even that is even, well, I mean, if you look at Vancouver and the difference, if you go to Surrey, it's completely different. It's a different landscape in every community. And so, you know, we just have to be more efficient at supporting what's going on the ground, instead of being constricted into what the policies allow us to do. We just can no longer rely on or believe that things will change if we keep allowing government structures to be the ones to continue to take that change. We'll just have far too many people dead. So we have to be the ones to actually push that. And I know all of you are doing it, but the most important thing is sharing that communication that you have with what's going on in your community with others, and also finding out what's going on in other communities. I've often believed that is probably the most, you know, empowering thing for me to understand. I went up to Fort Nelson last year to go do a talk, and I tell you, you want to see a town. Well, I'm talking about Safe Supply that's in the downtown east side. They think I'm from Pluto. There is no Safe Supply here, guy. There is the harm reduction services that exist. We have to meet people in the, like it's a drug deal. We have to drive around in our car and hand off the supplies, because people won't come to the facility because we're such a small town and everybody will know that that's where substance users go. So it's this stigma that's created, the discrimination in these conservative towns. And usually small rural towns are very, very conservative, right? You got a sheriff and you got a jail and a tiny courthouse, and that's where you're going. And so when they were telling me this, I immediately reflect back to, oh, this is the 80s. But that's where we have to start in some towns. You know, so how do we break down the silos? Where do we start from? Obviously, we're not going to be able to do what's going on in Vancouver. So my experience through decades of using substances and accessing services, it's almost like I can pinpoint what town I'm in, what year I'm in. Oh, I'm not in 2022 anymore. I'm in 1991. This is just the starting point in this town. And so you have to start there. But at the same time, you have to keep in mind that, you know, can you imagine being in Fort Nelson? They have a doctor that flies in once a month. And if you're not there to be there, he don't care either. It's not like he's going to leave you a methadone script. He's flying out, leaving. And then you're left to your own devices for a year or for the next month. I mean, mind blowing. Or obviously here in BC, I mean, the fantasy of Safe Supply, I think it's probably reminds me of the Fantasy Island show. You know, you're flying to a fantasy island to achieve your dreams and goals, but it's not reality. And so the accessible nature of that is very challenging. So one of the things that I think, you know, we all have to do is that communication, collaboration, and work together with each other and the existing providing services that are there. Like if somebody needs support, we just really have to show up We really have to show up. Gone are the days that, we just don't share the information with anybody, because when I find out what somebody's doing in a town, or somebody finds out what somebody's doing in Vancouver, what that does is it sparks the seed in somebody's head of like, wow, if they're doing that there, I mean, we could just try pushing for that here. Why not? And I always say that to people. It's like, we can do whatever means is necessary. And if that takes, honestly, sometimes, if laws and policies that are in place are killing people, then really those laws and policies, if they're not changed, then we need to change them ourselves. Many times in my life, people had overlooked policy and procedure to save my life. And I can think of many moments, even at Insight, when the direct mandate is if somebody overdosed there, me, I would be brought to the hospital and then monitored for 4 hours. Now, if I'd woke up in the hospital, I'd immediately want to leave. And I remember the one time that I'd overdosed, the nurse, when the ambulance came to grab me, I just said, there's no way I'm going to that hospital. And she actually broke protocol by allowing me to lie on the floor. She monitored me, let me fall asleep there, watched over me, and then also navigated the services of getting me upstairs to on-site. So sometimes, listen, we're going to have to do things where you're going to have to, break the rules a little bit, because somebody's life is at stake. And if we leave it up to what's in place, there's just, that's just too risky. And then obviously, you don't have to be in BC. You can be anywhere in the province to know, or the country, to know that the drug supply is lethal. And so how do we bring what exists in other communities to our communities? And guess what? It's going to take us all working together, sharing information of what's going on in each community, finding out what's going on in the community, where people are. Meeting those people too is very important. I always talk, when I talk about relationship equity, I'm talking about how Liz Evans walked the streets in the downtown east side, talking to people, making them feel good. I think a lot of the times too, to build relationships, sometimes handing out a coffee and a sandwich in your community is not too hard. It's not rocket science. And having some harm reduction gear, people look at that and go, wow, that in itself is huge. That doesn't take much. You know how long it takes to make 100 peanut butter sandwiches with a bunch of people and jelly, and hand out some harm reduction supplies and let people know that you'll be here every certain day at this time. People will show up, people get hope from that. And I think us as people have to do that, especially in these smaller towns or wherever you are. I think it's very important to let people know that you're there to support them. And in doing so, you're actually going to shape and change a lot of people's lives. And you probably already are doing that anyway. And I can definitely know and tell you from my own experience that it literally saved my life. I often reflect on a moment which was last Christmas 9 years ago. I'm sleeping in that doorway across from the West Hotel in the downtown east side. And some kind lady, I'm sleeping in a sleeping bag, freezing on Christmas morning. And she wakes me up, gives me a coffee, bends down, gives me a hug, and hands me $50 and says, "Merry Christmas." And I'm holding them, I'm so in shock. And she just walks away. I've never seen her again in my life. But I can promise you this, I've never forgotten that moment in my life. And it wasn't about 3 months later that I left the downtown east side. But that lady doesn't even know. I mean, I don't even know how much she understood, how much she impacted my life. But I just remember getting up and walking across the street and holding that $50 in my hand, thinking to myself, wow, like, does she even know what she did? Christmas is a really hard time for me. Even in my life today, it's a very hard time. But to have that lady do that just meant the world. It made that day so much better. And there's many moments of those types of moments that really catapulted my life into a different direction. And it gave me the understanding of people will always remember how you made them feel. They're never going to forget that. And when you do that without an expectation, she didn't give me any expectations on that money. She just walked away. I can guarantee you she knew what I was going to do with that money. And she didn't, it was a gift. And that to me changed everything and many other moments. So I'm happy to answer and all any.
Guy, I'm actually going to cut you off for a second. Just because we are still recording, and we just wanted to share this portion on our YouTube channel. I wonder if you could speak a little bit, because I know in the session we did before, it was in regards to the human connection. And I see that as being as part of the whole package of harm reduction. Could you speak to that a little bit more? And then once we'll capture that portion of it, and then we'll stop the recording and then let other questions come in, if that's all right.
Yeah, definitely. That is probably the biggest thing that changed my life, was having that connection with other people that, saw me at really vulnerable moments in my life, struggling and not judging me for it and trying to support me. That part of human connection actually just changed my life. I'll share a really good, powerful story about human connection, where I gave a guy, when I worked at the Connections Clinic in the downtown East Side, and he's always said to me, I give you permission to share my story. But he walked into the clinic one day and he said, his name was Ernie. And this guy struggled with substances, beat cancer twice, just a warrior, and homeless, using substances, and broke. But he came in and he said, I need some help. And I said, what do you need help with? And he says, well, I got no place to live, Guy. I got no money. And I use too much dope. And I said, I see, a lot of the times people often go to like, well, you got to stop using dope. Well, I just said, well, what do you want to work on first? And he said, I want to work on getting housing. And I said, well, that could take some time. He said, but I want to work on that. And I said, well, let's work on that. So we got them all applicated up at, BC Housing, and luck behold, I know some people at PHS. It took a few months, but we got him housing. And he was so happy. He's got his housing, and then he came back, and it was probably a good few weeks later, maybe even a month. And he came back and he said, I want to work on getting a job because I'm always broke. And I said, well, that sounds good. Well, what do you want to do? And he goes, I don't know. I go, have you ever thought of doing like some work at the chill room at Insight? They pay you $40. And he goes, I don't know. He goes, what about, you were saying that an OPS can hire you? I said, yeah, you can go there and pick up shifts. Well, we walked down to the OPS. He gets a gig there. He starts working, picking up a few shifts, then starts working a few more shifts. And then I didn't see him for a while. And he comes back to the clinic and he says, he just looks a completely different person. And I said, oh my God, what have you been doing? He says, well, listen, this is what happened. So remember when we worked on getting a place to live? Remember when I kept telling you I was broke and I needed some money? You went and got me a job. Well, guess what? Now when I work, I still use drugs, but I just don't use them as much as I used them before. And so we worked on all three things, but really what we worked on was the two most important things, which was human connection, him having the ability to come to me and know that I didn't care what he was doing. I just wanted to support him, getting him his housing, him finding getting a job and working. It slowed his drug use down, and it totally transformed his whole life. And today when I see him in the downtown East Side, the guy's just doing phenomenal. It goes to show you that when you connect with a person and let a person actually choose their path, you know, I often describe it as like, I didn't do any, I just a taxi driver. We're all just the taxi driver. Get in, where do you want to go? I'm going to drop you off. I'm going to support you. And then you take it to where you want to go to. And I tell you, that's been my approach. You know, people often, you have to let people explain what they want and what their needs are, not what your wants and your expectations are, because that doesn't work. I often just find that in my life, connecting with people and treating them like human beings really is the most important thing. I don't think you get too far if you don't know people. I mean, I know in my own life, I didn't get to where I am today without translating knowledge and human connection and showing up and meeting people for lunches and coffees and talking to people constantly. I mean, my whole job revolves around constantly talking with people, not only in the province, but like everywhere. I'll do anything for people because I know how powerful that is. And human connection can change the direction of people's lives. It really can. I think it's more powerful than a lot of the times we overlook it, as always trying to think like, how do we do this to help this person? It's sometimes just showing up and having a coffee and a cigarette. It's sometimes just walking down the street with them. You know, what I love about being in the downtown east side when I'm there is that probably takes me a good hour to walk a half block because I just talk to everybody. And I love it. And they don't talk, you know, what the interesting thing is people don't talk to me about, you know, dope. They're always talking to me about what they're doing or what they're trying to do or how they're trying to do it. And, you know, when you have that relationships with people, that will be the most powerful thing you can do in your life. And I know that people, you know, don't bite. Nobody gonna disrespect you if you're kind. I always say this is what I say to healthcare workers. If somebody throws coffee on you once, they had a bad day. Somebody throws coffee on you twice, you better look how you treat people. Because nobody gets thrown coffee on twice. Right? Nobody. Anyway, I'm happy to ask
Okay.
away any questions.
Thank you so much, Guy. And I'm just going to stop the recording now, and then we can.